she realizes that she's got to tell her two brothers, who both have daughters at this point, that, hey, you might not realize this, but dad shouldn't be alone with your girls. That's an explosive situation. Everything gets really ugly and breaks down at that point because, the brothers at first don't want to believe it, but then they do believe it, and then the mom's really angry. By the way, her parents had separated a long time ago because her dad wanted to start wearing women's clothes. So that was a bridge too far for her mom. Abuse the daughter all you want, but put on a dress, it's over. Mom's terrible. At no point does she ever seem to get that you ignored the child who's being abused, and now you want to ignore the adult who's coming to you and being like, Mom, listen to me. And mom's like, ah, the worst. Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Tia Denise. I am going to be reviewing Nobody's Girl by Virginia Roberts Giuffre. And I will tell you that I wasn't sure what to expect from this book at all. I knew that she had written the book with a co-author, and together that they had finished this book in October of last year. So it was in complete order, the way she wanted it to go out. And then she passed away, as you know, in April of this year. And I just wasn't sure really what this book would be, because I thought, what more is there to say about her life? Like, she has written about it, and she has had to talk about it in so many depositions, which we've read. She has had so many interviews, so many TV shows, so many articles have been written with her input that I thought, what more can you say? And I think in some ways that's kind of the way she felt when she wrote the book, because her co-author has said that she wrote the book with the hopes that if anyone had any questions, you could come to one source and hear the whole thing. Because, of course, interviews tell bits and pieces, but not the whole thing. And she was tired and physically breaking down. Her body was breaking down over the stress of having spent almost 20 years trying to tell her story about what had happened to her. So I will say that the stuff about Epstein was not mind-blowing. Not because her experience wasn't crazy, but the stuff about who he was and how he was functioning in the world and all the cross references of so-and-so said such and such and he did this and this has been reported. We know that ad nauseum. I've mentioned all of these experiences and all of the news about Epstein through several different books we've read. It's come up several different times, most notably and obviously in the book about Prince Andrew. All the Epstein stuff is covered at length in that book. So as far as the way Jeffrey Epstein functioned, none of that is revolutionary. Also, she does not name names that she hasn't previously exposed. So in this book, all of the obvious ones like Prince Andrew, I think there was a governor that I'm not recalling his name, but he is specifically named. Obviously, Clinton's name's going to come up. All of these people who are already exposed are once again named in this book, but she makes a lot of references to other people who she's mentioned before, but again, their names are still anonymous. They're still these kind of spooky people who are out in the world functioning, this elite group of people who are just running through the world, horribly treating people, and they have not been held to account. Now, obviously, their names are in the court record. Obviously, the people and the lawyers that she works with know exactly who the well-known prime minister is who assaulted her brutally, but that's not revealed. So if you were purchasing this book hoping that all would be revealed, it is not. And the thing is, she says she lives in fear of these people who have threatened her, that they will tie her family up in court for the rest of their lives and that they will be bankrupt. And as somebody who has had a tenuous relationship with finances her whole life and the life with her husband, they are struggling. She would not want to do anything that would make their lives harder. So that's the reason why she says she doesn't expose these people. I saw recently that George Clooney was very upset and very irate that his name had come up in the book. But even that, if anybody had read the book, it was the most lackluster passage. Ghislaine Maxwell, who I've called her Ghislaine all these years, but apparently you pronounce her name Ghislaine. Ghislaine Maxwell had been referenced as saying that she had serviced George Clooney sexually at a party one time. And Virginia's like, I don't even know if that's true. And that's what she said in the book. I mean, she never said it was fact. She just said that's the kind of thing that Ghislaine would say. So I don't know why George Clooney was up in arms about it. But see, that's what I'm saying. That was like one new name that was sort of referenced in the book, but that made headlines because there's actually nothing new in this book as far as Jeffrey Epstein is concerned. But what I did think was really interesting about this book was her personal journey, not the Epstein stuff, but I mean like how she became such a hurting person that it was easy for Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein to prey on her. And I thought that the stuff about her childhood, which was traumatic, was the most interesting as far as how it shaped her as a person who was willing to accept the abuse. And then I thought the story of how she escaped and then her relationship with her husband and how they tried to navigate her dealing with her abuse, that was all very interesting to me. But the Jeffrey Epstein part was actually the least interesting part, probably because I've read about it so many times and you've heard about it so many times, and there just wasn't anything new kind of to blow the lid off. Even all the stuff about the court cases and everything, like we know which sums of money were paid out. So I think what I'm going to focus on as I tell you about the story is the stuff from the beginning of her life and then the stuff that was going on with her and her husband as they tried to deal with her trauma and kind of how he was dealing with it. Because I don't think we know, or I didn't know a lot about that. And in fact, Virginia actually kept some things out of the narrative when it came to her relationship with her husband, which her co-author actually added in as a note at the very beginning of the book. So we'll discuss that in a minute. But I want to talk about the stuff that was happening to her as a kid and how that created a person who was so fragile and so just cracked and broken as a 16-year-old that she was very easy to pick up. This is my trigger warning to you. This is obviously a very dark story, and I'm going to do my best to tell it to you in a way that's not going to traumatize you or just give you too many horrible mental pictures. But I do want to let you know that if you were hurt as a child, or if it's going to be too upsetting to hear about that, this might be a good time to stop the episode or fast forward. Okay, so she begins the story by telling how she had been born to parents who had kind of a wandering background of their own. Her dad had been kind of a wild child in California. He was from a family that sort of did their own thing, made their own rules. And then her mother had actually come from means, but she was from a family with a very non-maternal mother, and she'd run away. And she had run away to California to be a hippie. When she met Sky Roberts, she had a son of her own named Danny, and she and Sky Roberts got married and moved to California, where they then had Virginia and a little boy who they named after her father, but they all called him Skydie. So Virginia grew up in Loxahatchee in Florida, and they didn't have very much money, but they purchased a plot of land with a sort of rundown house, but they were going to make this into a thriving farm. And at one point they bought a horse for her, and the horse's name was Alice, and she loved the horse, like with all of her heart, which is going to be a theme throughout the book. She loves animals so much, and all of her homes her whole life are going to be like a literal menagerie. And she tells about one time when they are moving very suddenly, which they do quite a lot, and she and her husband have a car full of 3 kids and then like multiple dogs, multiple cats, goldfish, hamsters, snakes. I mean, every small animal that you could fit into a car they have, and like multiples. So she loves animals and always will. But she and this horse had a really special bond because this horse gave her this sense of freedom. Because when she was young, her life had been, and I mean like real young, like up into the age of 7, her life was enjoyable. She and her mom loved her, and she felt very loved by her mother, and she loved to run around their property and ride her horse and climb the trees, and she loved school, and she was a really happy, healthy, thriving little girl. But then when she was around the age of 7, her mother started stepping away from her care duties as a mother, and her dad started to step in. And that's when things got really ugly, because her dad had very nefarious intentions for why he was suddenly caring for her during bath time and bedtime. Without getting into a lot of the horrible details, the sad thing to me about all of this is that, for the obvious reasons, it's horrifying, but her mother seems to have had some inclination that the father was being inappropriate, to put it mildly. And rather than deal with the sicko who was her husband, she began to develop a real agitation with Virginia. Suddenly this was Virginia's fault that there was some sickness going on in the house. Suddenly Virginia was the element in the home who needed to be dealt with. So her mom began to become very frustrated with her, very physically abusive of her, dismissive. Gone were the days of mother's care, because mother looked at her and saw this sick, twisted little kid with zero regard for the fact that the child had been sinned against by the disgusting dad. All right, so she's being hurt so constantly and continually that she's beginning to have medical problems, and her mom's having to take her to the doctor, and she's UTIs that are causing her to have accidents at school, and life is getting traumatic and it's becoming traumatizing because nobody will help her. She's getting mocked at school because she keeps having accidents. She's not able to focus on her schoolwork, so what once was a joy for her is now drudgery. All she has is her horse, who she loves dearly, but she's been told by her dad that if she says anything to anybody, he's going to take her horse away from her. And her horse was the one animal that she loved and loved dearly. And all along, her mom is pulling away from her and becoming more and more abusive. Well, more sadness is incurred because in a desperation to normalize what she's experiencing, she begins to play act some of that with a neighbor. And of course, when the adults find out that's going on, she is in grave trouble for it and is abused some more physically by her mother, who's like frustrated and disgusted with her for doing such a thing. She can't see her friend anymore, who was a good friend of hers. And nobody at any time thinks, maybe we should pump the brakes and ask, what have the adults been doing that would enable her to play like this? A child would not play like this, because you can read the book about what was happening, but it wasn't like a innocence of curiosity, okay? There was some real issues going on. So her life is in a horrific place. And let me remind you, she's 7 when this begins. And one of the really abusive factors of this is that her father is constantly telling her this is a special way he loves her. And then also he would tie in this disgusting behavior with genuine acts of kindness, like, let me abuse you and then we'll pop some popcorn and watch your favorite movie. So she in her mind was thinking, okay, I hate this thing, but he says it's because he loves me, and if I just hurry up with that, then we can go do the fun stuff. And that mindset is really going to end up influencing her when she gets into other horrific abuse scenarios, because in her mind, she's trained herself to think, shut my mind down, get done with this, and then we can go do something enjoyable, right? So she's really getting twisted up in her mind. She's truly just her soul is just being wrung out because she's being told that love is abuse. She's being told that love and affection should coincide with pain. And so you can only imagine that as she's like 7 years old, so she hasn't developed in any way. And then she's being like ripped apart in her mind. And so as she's trying to develop what it is to be a human, how can you know? Everything that is true is being warped for you. It gets worse, if it's possible to say that, because her parents were big partiers. And as the abuse is getting worse with her dad, her mother's falling deeper and deeper into alcoholism. So her mom is, rather than dealing with this, blaming the daughter and then getting drunk. So she can't rely on her mom whatsoever to save her from this. Meanwhile, they have a house full of partying people who definitely are living lifestyles of degeneracy. And her father has a friend named Forrest. Forrest has a daughter who he has regularly been hurting. And they have a conversation, which is verified by the other girl in the story, where the two dads are talking about, what if we exchanged our daughters and you could have my daughter and you could send your daughter here for a sleepover? Well, the other woman does not recall ever being actually sent over to Sky Robert, but Virginia remembers being sent over to this man named Forrest, and her father was well aware that it was happening. Devastating. So you can imagine that as your life is falling apart around you and no adult around seems to have any moral compass whatsoever, and you're being told that this is love and that your pain and your fear are all just part of life, what are you supposed to do? right? So that's going to twist her all up so that when she gets old enough to have actual relationships with people her age, she is making poor decisions and putting herself in compromising scenarios because, well, what is the right scenario? What am I supposed to feel? In traumatic episode after traumatic episode after traumatic episode, she eventually finds herself being slammed into this home called Growing Together. And this disgusting facility is supposed to take these kids and sort of rehabilitate them. Children who are failing school and like big problems and, societal blights. We'll send them here. And it's unbelievable that a facility like this exists. It's overcrowded, crawling with cockroaches. Everything is inadequate. It's dirty. It's disgusting. There's completely inadequate food. Everything is completely wrong. But even if the facilities had been stunning and wonderful and there'd been adequate food and the counselors hadn't been abusive, this stuff that they're having the kids do to rehabilitate themselves is things like look into a mirror and call yourself a whore. Look into the mirror and tell yourself that you're worthless. Look into this mirror and tell yourself that you are a degenerate. And then they'd have to sing songs about Jesus. I mean, how is that ever going to help anybody? And their parents would come once a week. And at these scenarios where the parents would show up, you would have to sit there while the parents talked about you, and the parents were required to call out all of your misdeeds and all of the terrible things you had done. And then you'd all stand up together and sing some little sing-songy story about how you had light, you had promise, and that, one day you could maybe hope to be something. But how does that factor in when during the rest of the week I'm calling myself a whore and telling myself I'm worthless as I scream at myself in a mirror? Like, these tactics on how to help these kids. Who came up with this? Satan? Well, yes. But anyway, she obviously can't maintain this existence. She keeps trying to run away and keeps trying to run away and keeps trying to run away. Well, at one of these times when she runs away, she finds herself with these two guys, and both of these guys get her really drunk and then put her in the backseat of a car and then take full advantage of her. And when she wakes up, she is bleeding and battered and broken, and she somehow gets away from them, and she runs away, and she finds herself sitting on the curb and trying to figure out what to do next when this limousine pulls up. And in the limousine is this old guy with this young model looking type of woman. And you're thinking at this point, is it Epstein? Nope, it's a different guy. It's some guy named Eppinger. And he is there to bring her into the fold, and he picks her up and he brings her back to his horrific apartment that's full of scantily clad women, and he calls her baby because she's the youngest of his girls, and he basically begins to sex traffic her. Okay. What? I mean, it's like, mind you, the girl's like 14. Okay, so skipping some of the things that happened to her, she's sent back to Growing Together, the horrible facility that had abused her previously. She cannot manage to live at Growing Together anymore. It's too horrific. So she begs and pleads and asks her dad to please get her out. And he says he will, but then he hems and haws and takes forever. Eventually, he finally manages to get her out. He is her dad. It seems like he could have just taken her out of the program. But she's dropped out of school at this point, and she meets a guy named Michael, and it's not a love match. But she's desperate to build something that feels like maybe some kind of normalcy, maybe some kind of safety. He's her age instead of some disgusting, gross old man. So she tells herself that this is something good, So together, she and Michael move into this trailer on her parents' property. And her dad at that same time had just gotten a job as a maintenance man over at Mar-a-Lago. He tells her, you can come and get a job here. They need some girl at the spa. So she goes and gets a job as a receptionist at the spa. And she's loving it because there's rules, there's order, there's boundaries. When you work there, you get this whole little booklet about all the rules and like what you're expected to do and how you're expected to present yourself and what you're supposed to look like and how your uniform needs to be. And she loves it. She loves that this is a place that wants it to be nice. She likes the fact that this is a place that takes itself seriously and like wants to present itself as a good, clean, organized place. It feels nice to her to be at a place where rules and order are the name of the game. So she's loving it. And as a receptionist, she actually sits outside of the spa, and you go and talk to her, and then you go into the building. So she's sitting there one day, and she's got this book on human anatomy because she's thinking she didn't finish her high school degree, but she wants to go and get her GED, and then she wants to maybe become a masseuse. So she's looking at this anatomy book as she waits for people to come up. Well, who should roll up but Ghislaine Maxwell? And Ghislaine says to her, "Oh, you're interested in anatomy." And of course, she has a great way of presenting herself. She seems like this really nice woman who is really interested in the welfare and the well-being of other people, and especially the welfare of young girls. She wants to be the person who's going to hook you up in life. You know, she's just a girl's girl. She wants to help you, you know, and that's her life mission, and her life goal is to help you. So she says, you know, I know this guy who's looking for a traveling masseuse, and we would love to give you a leg up. Well, I think to any trained ear, it would be like, well, why the F would you want to do that? Like, you know what I mean? It's like, I think any of us would be, who have a little life experience, would be like, well, I obviously don't know what I'm doing. I've never been to masseuse school. Like, you're clearly feeding me a lie. And any adult in Virginia's life should have immediately been like, what are you talking about? Don't talk to those people. That's weird. You know, not to degrade Virginia, but like nobody is going to give you a job as a masseuse when you're not a masseuse. And if they say they are, that's big fat questions to me. Well, she goes that day to Epstein's house. She's been given their address, and she goes. If I remember her correctly, her dad dropped her off because she wasn't driving at this time, or didn't have a car. She was 16. She misremembered later on and said she was 15 when she first met them, but she was 16. And this was like some big point that Ghislaine tried to make, you know, how could she be a truth teller? She didn't even know how old she was. It's a long time ago. Like, I don't remember what I was doing from year to year as a teenager. Like, it all kind of like runs together, you know? So she said she was 15, but she was 16. Regardless, it was her dad who dropped her off. And she goes in, and Ghislaine says that she's going to teach her how to massage Jeffrey. So they, you know, give the massage. But before it's even over, both Epstein and Ghislaine have used and abused her. And that's all I'll say about that. So she stumbles out of there with $200 in cash in her hand, and she's driven home by their chauffeur. You know, and I think for a person who had never been hurt before, you would think, I got to tell somebody. Somebody's got to know what happened to me. I don't know that you could cover for what had just happened to you. But remember, this is a person who'd spent her whole life being abused by people who had supposedly her interest in mind. Her mother and her father. Her father abused her. Her mother looked the other way. Then she is hurt and abused by that old geezer who found her on the street, and between that, she was being taken advantage of by numerous boys anytime they could. So these two people taking advantage of her would have been like another data point for life. You know, I guess that's what people do. Well, she goes back home to Michael, and it's really terrible and it's really traumatic. But at the same time, she believes that they're really going to help her become a masseuse. And she thinks, well, I do want to do that in my life. So maybe I keep going and they keep helping me get better. Quite frankly, this is a person who had learned, get the gross stuff over with so the good stuff can come. So I guess he wants these massages, but then he's going to teach me how to be a masseuse and I can earn an actual living. So get the gross stuff done so the good stuff can come. And they proceed to have her, like, tell her you need to be on call at any time, but every time you come, we'll pay you. So she does, and she becomes more and more entrenched in their lifestyle. Ghislaine tells her the famous line of, I don't even care that he's got all these girls coming, because it wasn't just her. She saw lots of girls coming and going. Ghislaine says, I can't keep track of this man's needs, and I don't want to. So I'm more than happy to find the girls to bring in, because his appetite is more than I can deal with. Supposedly, he said he needed it 3 times a day. I mean, that's insane. But he was an addict, and he had extreme problems, obviously. So they end up really liking Virginia. And one of the reasons they liked Virginia was because she'd been an abuse victim and because she'd learned to people please to get through life, and she'd learned how to read the room. So they didn't have to tell her a lot of stuff. She kind of knew what they wanted and how she was supposed to behave, and she saved them a lot of time. Now, Jeffrey really liked girls who had no experience whatsoever because he enjoyed deflowering them. That was a big thing for him. So Virginia wasn't able to fulfill that particular desire, but she knew what they wanted her to do. And the book, of course, goes on to explain that it was kind of a pyramid scheme. You know, you go out and find a girl, and then we'll pay you extra for finding a girl. You know, so everybody you bring in, we pay you more. And she says it wasn't about the money because they were giving her enough money. In fact, they'd even given her enough money to rent her own apartment so she could move off her parents' property. And she and Michael had moved into an apartment paid for by Epstein. But she was afraid of making him angry with her for not bringing somebody. So she continued to go with it, bring him people. And she does, of course, talk about her regrets in that. And for me, this is kind of, I think, one of the first issues I had in the book. And this, I think, is one of the things where I wish that she would have spent less time telling me what I needed to hear and telling me more about how she felt motivated to do some of the things she did. Because, of course, she did go out and get other girls for Epstein. Like I said, she was afraid of his wrath, afraid of his anger. But I would have loved if she spent less time being like, I know it was really bad. I'm really sorry that I did it. You know, I have to live every day with what I did. I still see the girls' faces who I did. I did it a lot. Some of the girls I can't even remember. Everybody that I brought in. And so she does a lot of saying sorry because she knows people want her to be sorry. And I'm sure she is sorry. But I also think it's like, I thought that her explanation for him, like for fear of him being mad, I think I would have liked to have her talk more about her psychology and where she was when she did some of the things that she did that are reprehensible. I think I would have found it more interesting than an apology because I know she's sorry. Nobody would imagine you would do something like that and not be sorry, especially because you'd been victimized yourself. But I think, too, one of the things that I thought often as I was reading this was, I think one of the reasons you brought other people in is because you were still alive and you had managed to do it and you had managed to figure out how to live with this and you had figured out how to like box the things off in your head that were going to kill you if you thought about them too long. And you'd been doing that since you were 7. So in your mind, it wasn't great what you were doing. On paper, it was bad. But in your heart of hearts, you thought, but I'm still alive. I'm making it. And I've been hurt since I was 7. So it is possible to do this thing and still live a life. Because at that point she was. And I don't think a lot of this came back to haunt her until like right before she died. I think her body was literally breaking down with the pain of what had happened to her. And we'll get to that if I can speed this up a little bit. But to me, the psychology of bringing somebody else in isn't because you're a wretch yourself and trying to victimize people, because I don't think that was it. I think, yes, she was afraid of making him angry, but I think also she minimized the pain that these girls would go through because, one, she wasn't being honest with herself about the pain she was living through, but also she'd figured out how to do it and how to pretend like life was okay. And I think that she just assumed they would too. And they could make peace with it because she had. And I think that's how like victims become abusers, because they tell themselves, but I'm okay. I'm okay. They'll be okay too. Anyway, over the course of time, she becomes somebody who Epstein really relies on. And she kind of, I wouldn't say his number one girl, because he had like a couple of consistent players in his life. It wasn't always a revolving door. But she was kind of looked on as like a personal little security blanket. Like he would have her tuck him into bed, and that didn't always mean like a sexual thing. In fact, it rarely did. He wanted his feet rubbed till he fell asleep and his head rubbed until he fell asleep, and like he wanted the blankets tucked in. He wanted to be like taken care of at night before he went to bed, but not in a sexual way, like in a maternal way. And he would always talk about how she was so maternal, which Ghislaine was not. Ghislaine was not a maternal soul at all. And so he liked that in Virginia. And the sick thing about this time in her life was she'd started to think of him in a way she liked him. Not like, it was kind of like a fatherly figure in a sense. And he was always trying to like give her tips for life and teach her about things he thought she should know. And even at one point, they sat down to eat a meal together and her table manners weren't very good. And so Galen was like, no, 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 no. And teaches her how to fold her napkin, eat with like her silverware properly and everything like that. So they took on these weird parent roles in her life. And because she'd been so brutally abused by her own parents, she could almost make it work. Like, she could almost think of these people in ways that were loving and believing that they had her best in mind. But that stopped being something that she could believe when he started trading her out to other men. Now, her own father had done that to her. So there was a sense that, well, I guess it goes with the territory, but it started to become more and more where he was okay in putting in her really traumatic situations. And then it was never a care or concern for her that she was like physically hurt. It was just kind of like, well, and one of the examples is when he gave her to the very well-known prime minister, whoever that is, who turned out to be an absolute brutal beast and beat her up and choked her and just raped her in every conceivable way. And when she walked out of the room bleeding and broken, she asked him, how could you do that to me? How could you send me in there with him? And his response was, yeah, you'll get that sometimes. And so it's like this veneer that she'd kind of created to make it okay that he was kind of like this father figure began to crack, because you'll get that sometimes when I'm coming to you literally bleeding from all the places. And, you'll get that sometimes. And he'd become very physically abusive during their sessions together as well. So when he started introducing violence and allowing other people to introduce violence with her, that's when she really started feeling like things were terrible. So speeding up, it began to be like something she could not exist in any longer. And she had begun taking a lot of drugs and Xanax all the time to deal with it. And at one point, Epstein found her too sloppy to have around. He thought it was gross because he wanted these like young, sweet, stars in their eyes, just chipper young things. And she was looking used and abused because she was used and abused. And she was taking drugs to deal with it. And he was grossed out by that and kind of sent her on her way, just get out, And at first she tried to pretend that she was really happy that that had happened. And there was a part of her that was happy, but being dismissed from his presence made her feel bad in some sense. Eventually, she ends up finding her way back to him. Meanwhile, she's having lots of drama in her own personal life. An ex-boyfriend had shown back up and she'd hooked up with him and then gotten rid of the guy she was with. And then her new boyfriend was living with her. And he knew all the stuff that was going on. Michael had not known, but new guy, Tony, she told him everything that was going on in her life. And Tony was not a huge fan of it, but at the same time, he was a fan of the money that Epstein was providing. So he kind of turned the other way. But he was also not faithful to Virginia because in his mind it was like, well, why should I be? You're with a different guy every weekend through Epstein. So you can't exactly call me to fidelity here. He was an absolute scumbag, to say the least. So her life's in chaos, But when Epstein dismisses her, she decides that she's going to try to really make it work with Tony. And, he'd hurt her by cheating on her and stuff like that. But she felt like she couldn't say anything to him because her lifestyle was hard for him. So they were going to try to actually have a real existence together. So she tries to go get a job. She has trouble finding work at first, but then she finds a job as a waitress. And then she's working as a waitress and it's going well and she's enjoying the work. And she loves her coworkers and she likes the consistency and the normalcy of it. But then one day Tony comes to pick her up from work and he's sitting at the bar and there's a jar that's got money in it and Tony takes it. And then she's blamed for what Tony did and she pays back the money and everything. But her boss is still like, we don't need somebody of your ilk around here. And basically chucks her out on the street. The same day, who should give her a call? But Galen. I don't know how Galen knew what had gone down. I think it was just honestly like the demons whispering in Galen's ear, now's the time to strike. Because here Virginia was feeling upset, like I don't know what to do now. So she decides that she's going to go back to work for Epstein. And this is when they decide they're going to be flying her all over the world, and it's going to be like this, whirlwind situation. And she's, they're really going to make life very exciting for her. Not that they hadn't taken her to some places before, but now she's going all over the world. What's so shocking to me about this time period in her life is how young she looks. Because I think I had become accustomed to seeing her in interviews and stuff now, and I am flabbergasted at her youth. Take a look at this picture right here. This picture of Naomi Campbell's birthday, which was on a yacht, shows Ghislaine in the background, and it shows Virginia right there in the foreground. What the hell? That is a little bitty baby. And this is the age that she was when they're dragging her all over the place, because that outfit she's wearing in that picture is the same outfit she was wearing when she went to go see Prince Andrew. And in the picture of Prince Andrew, she does look a little bit older to me. But from this angle, you see what a child she actually was. And it's so heartbreaking. Just so heartbreaking. And angering that there's so many people who had to have thought something's weird here. And then never said anything, never did anything. Well, while she's with Epstein and Ghislaine on the second round, they start approaching her about how maybe she can carry one of his kids, because he'd been real on about this. He suddenly had this idea that he wanted to basically populate the whole world with his offspring. Like, he had these visions where and these fantasies about how he wanted all these kids by all these different women. And Ghislaine and Jeffrey one day approach her and say, "We want you to have our baby." And she immediately was like, "What? No. Like, I am not." But she didn't tell them that. But she was thinking in her mind, I really need to get away from these people. Because it's one thing to hurt me, but I'm not going to have a kid that I have to hand over to you. And then God knows what you'll do with that kid. So she says to them, after mulling it over, she says, "Look, I really want to become a masseuse, and you guys have been telling me for a long time you're going to make that happen. So I will have this baby for you, but can you send me to become a masseuse?" And so they say yes, but they're going to send her to a place in Thailand. So in a really interesting turn of events, she gets sent to Thailand to go to this massage school. And while she's there, she meets a guy named Robbie Giuffre. And Robbie is from Australia. He's there with a friend who's also at the massage school. And they fall instantly in love with each other. Like, madly, instantly, deeply in love. And she decides that she's going to tell him everything that's been going on with her and Epstein, because she really, really cares about him and she doesn't want to hold anything back. She doesn't want to lie. So she tells him, and he's like, "You don't have to live like that. Like, you do not." And so he wants to rescue her from the situation. So they decide that they're going to get married there. They go up to this Buddhist temple. They get married. She has a dress and everything made for her. But she knows that she's going to have to call Jeffrey and tell him goodbye. Because that was an agreement. Robbie said, "I want you to end things with him. And I want to be in the room when I hear you tell him that you're done with him and everything he has planned for you." So she'd agreed to that before, but then when it was time to do it, it was kind of like, scary. But she does do it. And Jeffrey is like, "Have a good life. Goodbye. Click." And that's that. So she and Robbie get back to Australia. A little bit of drama in that as she's trying to fly back and she's stopped by customs and everything. But it all works out. So she goes on to live her life with him. And this is really, I think, the part of the book that I thought was really interesting. Because to try to have a normal life when nothing about your life has ever been normal is so painful to read about for both Robbie and for her, because I think he really wanted to be her savior. He saw this person who was being horribly abused, and here was a person who wanted to go in and take care of her, which is a super noble virtue. At the same time, though, I think that what often happens when we start relationships with broken people, we love the idea of being the person who got them out of it. And it's not that that's so self-serving, although there is a tinge of self-service there, because there's this, it's nice to think of yourself as a sort of person who could be that for somebody else. But it's a very romantic idea to save somebody from a traumatic, broken experience. But the reality of living with a traumatized, broken person is very difficult and very, very painful. And she had extreme PTSD. as you can imagine. And also her sexual experiences were obviously going to affect deeply what they were able to do themselves, because so many things were triggering to her. So many things were difficult for her to experience. So many things brought back all of these painful experiences. So she wasn't able to do certain things with him, and she definitely didn't want him to do certain things to her. And so it just was like a constant trip up for the two of them. And he had a really strong personality. Like, he could be very angry and frustrated about things. He was always on her side. I think that's really important. Is I think that he really, really wanted her to be well and to be happy. But I think the experience of trying to help this broken person into a normal life was hard for him a lot. But they go to stay with his family at first, and his family is from Italy, and they had moved to Australia. But his parents were awesome. His dad in particular was really awesome. And I really loved the stories that she would tell about how he would help her with things, like in a good dad way, not in a like creepy, I'm going to pretend to help you but really manipulate you kind of way, which is the way her dad is. And she tells one story about, at first they'd lived with his family, but then they went and they got their own apartment. And one day there was this huge huntsman spider on the wall of their house, and she was freaking out about it. And she calls her father-in-law, and like he just comes running over, like he jumps in the car, comes running over and like deals with it for her. Because she called Robbie, and Robbie's like, I'm at work, like literally what am I going to do? But the father-in-law comes running over. And you know, when she was first there, like, you know, she is dressed in clothes that are like very scantily clad. I mean, she looks like her lifestyle, you know, because that's the kind of clothes that Epstein had wanted her to wear. So all of her wardrobe is like short shorts and like thongs showing and tiny little shirts. And so God knows, as she says, what her in-laws thought of her. Like her mother-in-law was a little bit like very forceful at first, but they find their way together. And it's a really sweet story in a lot of ways about the way his family wanted her to be well and helped her to be well, and as well as she could be. It's very heartwarming and encouraging that there were finally some adults who knew how to love and nurture without being manipulative and creepy and weird and broken themselves. So anyway, they go on to have 3 kids in pretty quick succession. But see, that's filled with trauma too, because her first, you know, they have a boy at first and they name him Alex, and then they have a little boy named Tyler. And Tyler had like a myriad of issues when he was little. Like, I don't know if it was some kind of autism or what it was, but he was nonverbal. He couldn't be stopped from doing things that would hurt him. He was constantly banging his head on the floor. He was constantly jumping into the pool. Like, he didn't know how to swim, and they couldn't keep him like from just running full blast into the pool time and time again, like having to jump in and save him from drowning himself. Eventually she has to put him on a leash because she's like, I can't, like, this boy's like running to hurt himself constantly. And so, but also like she'd not been mothered well. So like just trying to learn how to be a mom, and like boom, boom, boom. She's like having babies every time you turn around, like barely gave birth and she finds she's pregnant again. Trying to cope with her own PTSD, trying to be there for her kids as a mother, even though she doesn't really know what that looks like. She and her husband are obviously at odds sometimes because, you know, they don't have a lot of money and he's working as hard as he can. She's not able to work because of the kids. But then also I think it was just very difficult for her to be in the workforce. I think that the PTSD and the mental struggles and stuff were like debilitating sometimes. So it was just, she just had to stay home. And so money was an issue. The PTSD was an issue. The baby who was nonverbal, who was hurting himself all the time, was really hard. And I just think that even when everyone's healthy and well, parenting 3 small babies, it's really freaking hard, you know, even if you have a great marriage, even if, you know, the kids are relatively healthy, even if you have good in-laws, it's still hard. So add to the fact that she's an unwell person because of everything that's happened to her. She's got a really sick middle child who's constantly trying to hurt himself. The marriage is sometimes hard because her husband has a big personality and she's struggling with all her things. And honestly, I was overwhelmed. But then you add to the fact that they move a lot. Like, they make big moves a lot, and just like suddenly. And sometimes it was job related and everything. But what was really interesting in all of this is she's trying to live a life devoid of everything that had happened to her in the past. Like, that's in the past, I'm moving on. And I think that that's what Robbie thought they were going to do. Like, yes, you're going to have problems and it's going to be difficult because of what you've been through, but I saved you from that and now we're going to build another life. And maybe it was overly optimistic to think that that could be a possibility, that you could leave everything in the past. I think certainly he expected it, like, there to be hard things, like, say, like with their sex life, that was hard. But I think he thought that, like, over time you could be okay. And it probably maybe would have been. But she ends up being tracked down by a tabloid newspaper, and they find out who she is and they want to get her story. And all of this has come to light because Epstein has gotten his little sweetheart deal and all that's going down. And so her name ends up coming up. And so this journalist finds her and flies to Australia to interview her. She has with her a photographer, and that's where the famous picture of Andrew comes in. But see, she got a lot of heat for this because she accepted a sizable sum for this interview, not realizing that you're not supposed to be paid for an interview. This tabloid magazine came to her, offered her like $150,000. They needed the money, and she thought, you know, what a windfall. And also, I want that guy to be in trouble for what he's done, and it doesn't really seem like he's having to pay for his crimes over there. So she spoke openly about what had happened and then received money. And she didn't, according to her, she didn't realize that wasn't something you should do. And quite frankly, I have to tell you, I don't think I would have known either. I wouldn't have known that was something I wasn't supposed to do. She finds herself being inundated with more and more people who want a piece of what she has to say. And she's finding herself with an increasing number of offers to talk. So she starts talking. And the book goes on and on about each interview and about the different lawyers she has and the different indictments and the different depositions. And it's extensive in that, but also it's kind of, if you followed her story at all, you probably know about all of these things. You know about how she did an interview with ABC, but then they didn't air it. You know about her Panorama interview. You know about her 60 Minutes in Australia interview. You probably know about all of that. So that for me was less interesting. But what was more interesting to me was the way that she was personally dealing with coming out and talking about her story. Because as she decided to actually deal with some of the stuff that had happened through trying to seek justice, she curiously wanted, I think, to make peace with her family as well. And for me, this is the part of the story that was harder for me to understand, because I got why she wanted justice from Epstein. This is a person who had so many relationships with the elite. The elite had abused her under his care. Thanks to him and thanks to Ghislaine, she had been hurt by all of these people through his network. So wanting to bring that crashing down made total sense to me. But what I struggled with was, as she looked to deal with that part of her broken history, she also wanted to deal with her family, which would make sense to me, except the way she wanted to deal with it was get close to them again. And she wanted to fix her relationship with her dad and her mom. And actually, her dad had flown on 2 separate occasions to come and visit her in Australia. And at both times, he'd acted like a total freak. And at both times, she had to tell him his behavior was inappropriate. There'd be different times when he'd be like sidling up to her in a way that was inappropriate. Also showing her pictures of nude people on his phone, like just really weird stuff that a dad doesn't do. It just seemed weird to me that after having him to Australia twice and it had ended badly on both accounts, specifically the second one where her husband literally threw him out of the house, I just thought to myself, why are you wanting to pursue this? But she wanted to pursue it so much that she convinces her husband that they need to move to America. And this was the second time she'd wanted to move back to America. The first time they hadn't been allowed to because they didn't have enough funds in their bank account. And there was a sense that they wouldn't be able to support themselves in America if they went. So you have to have a certain amount of money, I suppose, in order to get a visa, in order to go over for an extended time. I don't know all about it, but that was the first reason that they couldn't go. So the second time, they have enough money now because they've gotten paid from that one article. So she wants to move to America. And her husband does so with trepidation. And I honestly, like, huge props to him for like letting her, I guess I shouldn't say letting her, but allowing her to maybe try to heal this, since that seems so important to her. Because if I were him, I would have been like, we're not moving back to America with your abusive dad, not with our 3 kids. Not we have a daughter. No, like, I'm sorry that you really want to see these people. I'm not moving everything we have and our kids and our pets to another country where your abusers live. You're safe here. Let's not go back and go move in next to your abusive dad. Like, I didn't get why that was something she wanted to do. I tried to. I really tried to get it. I could not. Anyway, through the course of the time trying to be close to her dad, he reveals him to be the abuser that they've known him to be all along. He continues to try to make advances to her, and he's inappropriate, and she realizes that she's got to tell her two brothers, who both have daughters at this point, that, hey, you might not realize this, but dad shouldn't be alone with your girls. That's an explosive situation. Everything gets really ugly and breaks down at that point, because, you know, the brothers at first don't want to believe it, but then they do believe it, and then the mom's really angry. By the way, her parents had separated a long time ago because her dad wanted to start wearing women's clothes, so that was a bridge too far for her mom. Abuse the daughter all you want, but put on a dress, it's over. Anyway, it blows up the family that he is revealed to be the pedophile that he is. So they obviously can't keep living there. So then she decides to pick everything back up, and they're going to move to Colorado, where her mom now lives. And she's going to try to cultivate a relationship with her mom, who, by the way, wants nothing to do with her reality of having been abused by Epstein. Because when she tries to talk to her mom about it, because it's all in the news now, when she tries to talk to her mom about it, her mom's like, yeah, I just, la 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 la, I don't like hearing about it. It makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to hear about it. So her mom is just a useless piece of, well, I shouldn't say that, but her mom's terrible. At no point does she ever seem to get that you ignored the child who's being abused, and now you want to ignore the adult who's coming to you and being like, Mom, listen to me. And mom's like, ah, the worst. Anyway, as the book goes on, it talks about all of the court cases and lots and lots and lots of stuff about her lawyer. This is under the whole warrior phase of the book. And I don't know, you guys. I didn't understand, and probably because I've been very blessed to not be abused. So it's kind of unfair of me to be like, I don't get this, because, well, why would I? I didn't live her life. I don't know what it feels like. At a certain point, the cost to the family and to her seemed too high to pay. At a certain point, and I think that's the struggle that Robbie had, was that he felt like, it's costing you. She was so in her head all the time about everything that had happened, obviously. But having to rehash it. She's on the phone constantly. She's talking to lawyers constantly. There's interviews constantly. She's having to fly everywhere constantly. And the whole family's identity is now wrapped up in what had happened to her before. They're moving all the time. These huge, big moves. Because, by the way, Colorado is not working out for them. They're going to have to move again. It's a really high tension time in the marriage. There's paparazzi everywhere. They're being chased in the street by paparazzi. They've been run off the road. There are times when they're having to drive extraordinarily recklessly, U-turns in the road to try to get away. There are people showing up to their house, breaking into their house to like rearrange things and make it obvious that they were there, and showing up in the middle of the night to just park in their driveway and shine lights on the house. It's just like wild stuff. The police are constantly being called. They've gone and gotten guns. You know, they've tried to arm themselves. It's just high tension. And an incident that she leaves out of the book, but that her co-author noted in the opening introduction. She and Robbie have had tumultuous times. Robbie, I think, was supportive of her, but I think it was frustrating to him to have so much of their life wrapped up in the painful past that she'd experienced. And I do think he wanted justice for her, but I think at the same time he wanted life to be like some kind of normal for their kids. And they're moving across the globe, and you're moving from Sydney to Cairns to all these different places. And I think that there is a sense of like, can we just put down some roots? Can we just like have a life? You know, could you just be a mom? Because I thought that's what you wanted to do. And now it's, you know, we're running through the streets trying to get away from paparazzi and, you know, buying guns. And, you know, the kids, like, what do you tell the kids, you know? No, she told the kids that she was in the business of, like, hunting bad guys or something vague like that, to protect them to a certain extent. But they knew that their mom was involved in something really hard and dark. And so they also were aware that there was a constant threat over their lives. And I think that Robbie was just over it. Now, that does not forgive what he does, because apparently there was an altercation, a physical altercation, in which he assaulted Virginia. And she called the police, and apparently there are pictures in her private collection of wounds that she sustained because Robbie assaulted her. And so he wasn't allowed to come back to the house. So he actually moves back to Australia. And remember, this is at the height of time when they're feeling threatened. So, but he moves because he's not allowed to come back to the house. So he moves, but in the book it describes him as going back to Australia to like set up a home for them. Although in reality it was more like he had to because he beat his wife up. And this apparently was not the only time. There's going to be another incident later on, closer to the end of her life, when she sustained abuse by Robbie, who I think was just like a very angry person sometimes, very frustrated. Which, on one hand, I will never give a pass to any man who hits a woman. At the same time, I do understand his frustration at feeling like you spent 19 of your lives under his abuse, and then she's going to go on to spend another 19 years trying to get justice. And it's going to eventually break her body down. Because they move back to Australia. At various points, her kids are like sometimes homeschooled, sometimes not. I mean, like schooling seems to be very kind of up in the air. I feel really like unsettled for her kids' sake, because all of this like up and down and moving and like all this drama, like we're gonna go and meet your American family, but oh, your American grandfather's a pedophile, but we already knew he was, so why do we move the whole family over there? Like, I do find myself often frustrated at the way things are being dealt with, the financial ups and downs. Like, they'll get a little bit of money and then the way they just blow it on vacations and houses, and like, I'm just like, you guys, let's maybe invest. I don't know. Like, I feel really frustrated, I think, sometimes with the way the decisions are like, just like suddenly they get an idea and they're like, let's move 1,000 miles away. And I do know that sometimes like there was the sense of like a threat on their lives. At one point, the FBI contacts her and tells her that there's a credible threat on her life. And then she's supposed to herself contact the federal authorities in Australia, and then they give her the runaround. So then her husband just like goes and gets a camper, and then they go and they camp for 3 weeks in the middle of nowhere. And that's the solution. And I'm like, but the kids in school and stuff. And like, I don't know. It's just, I don't know where you would say I'm being paranoid and when there's an actual threat. And if the FBI calls you and says there's an actual threat, you would think that that's something you should listen to. But like, when do you know when you're not threatened anymore? When can you come back home? When can the kids lead a normal life, you know? And so I don't know. I felt like really a lot of emotions about the way the two of them were trying to handle it. And I understand, like, she had been so broken and so hurt, and I think Robbie really thought he could help. And then I think that he felt frustrated that she could never leave what had happened to her in the past, because with every single interview that happened, I have to relive it. I have to relive it. Every deposition, you know, every questioning by the lawyers. It was a constant re-traumatization. And she physically starts breaking down. She breaks numerous bones. She has infections that won't heal. She's got meningitis at one point. She's got, she falls and breaks her neck at one point because she's so dizzy from the meningitis. She's having surgeries. Then she's got fibromyalgia. She can't get out of bed. Then she starts getting really depressed. And previously she had told somebody that she would never kill herself. But then she starts getting really depressed because of the physical pain. She starts getting back into painkillers, which is something that had been an issue for her, obviously, when she was with Epstein. But even after she left Epstein, when she first got married, she still had some of those pain pills. She never actually makes a clear delineation as to when she stopped taking those pain pills, but we're led to believe that she had at some point. Because when she breaks her neck, she tells herself, I need to be really careful about not getting too into those painkillers, but then she does. And then Robbie's having to lock up the pain pills in the gun safe because she's wanting to take them all the time. And so she's in pain, she's over-medicated, and she decides that she just wants to take herself out. And she has 2 suicide attempts before she actually, I don't want to say succeeds, but before she actually finally does kill herself in April. But the book kind of ends on this hopeful note because she's talking about all the things she's excited to see with her kids. and these hopes and dreams she has that she and her daughter will be able to develop some kind of horse therapy camp, because she, as a child, had a neighbor who was a horse therapist and helped kids with learning disabilities through horses, and so she wanted to do the same. So it's a really sad ending to the book, because we see her decline, and she's worked so hard, and we do see these wins, but it's kind of been stretched out so long, over such a long period of time. We see the ups and downs with her and her husband, who apparently, before her death, they had another altercation where he had assaulted her, and he had claims against her as well, and so they had separated again, and he had the kids, and I think that's ultimately what led to that final suicide attempt, because what had kept her going all this time was the kids. Even though I think those kids are really, quite frankly, between you and I think they were far too dragged into this. When her boys were 13 and 12, she allowed them to see the 60 Minutes profile on her, which I can tell you, as the mother of a 12-year-old, if that had been my past, that boy would not know. I just would not allow him to know about those things yet, because I still think 12 is just too young. It's too young to know about your mother's abuse at the hands of an Epstein, But she made that call, and quite frankly, like, they had already been living under the influence of everything that had happened for a long time, as she flew back and forth, or they were suddenly moving, or they were having to hide from people. So my heart really went out to the kids, I think, because I know she was doing her best to protect them from a fate that had hurt her, but the reality is that her fate was not being kept from the kids, because as she was trying to deal with what had happened, they're getting like a different kind of trauma because of what had happened. And I'm not blaming her for that. I know she needed to hold Epstein to account, but I think the sad thing is that that's the horrible and sad thing about these kinds of traumatic events, is that even as you try to deal with them, there's like different categories of trauma that fall from that initial one. Yeah, so maybe her kids aren't being sexually traumatized, but now they're having to hide and be afraid and move across the country and find out that grandpa's really a pedophile, and your parents are like constantly at odds together because your dad just wants a normal life. Well, also he does want to support your mom, but he's frustrated at having to do all the things. And another thing that was really hard is that she couldn't work outside the home because of her myriad of issues. She didn't have a work history, but then also I think just PTSD was really hard. And then her husband, constantly feeling like the family was not safe, didn't feel like he could work outside the home. So he didn't really have consistent employment. So money was always an issue. So obviously these windfalls from these different legal battles were very helpful. But it sometimes felt like the only way the family had money was if she got money from a scenario, and she makes clear that it wasn't about the money, but I also think, I don't know how they would have carried on without it, and so don't hear me blaming her for receiving what was her right. I think a financial windfall was her right, but I also am confused as to what they were going to do when the settlements stopped coming, because they weren't necessarily super smart with the money either, because they would spend it like in huge chunks. The book goes out of its way really to explain some of the claims that she's a duplicitous person who makes up facts and everything. And I will say, after reading this book, I didn't get the feeling that she had knowingly lied at any point in her story. And she does a good job about clearing up some of the questions. I was not satisfied with any of the information about Alan Dershowitz. She says she can't really talk about it because the agreement was that they would not talk about each other if they made a settlement in which neither of them had to pay the other. But I also feel like that was the one question for me, like, how did you get it wrong? Because she goes throughout the entire book talking about how she knew without question the people who had assaulted her. And she was given numerous times pictures of all these different men who had a finger pointed at them. And she was supposed to pick out the people. And she always was able to pick out the people without a question in her mind. Like, I know that guy. I know that guy. I know that guy. So it's weird to me that she got Alan Dershowitz wrong. Because she says she has, without question in her mind, every single face that of any person who ever assaulted her. So it's not a question of, well, it was a dark room, I'm not sure, even though that kind of stuff did happen. And I've heard her co-author make comments that they were dark rooms, it's hard. But she goes out of her way in this book to say, I know every person who assaulted me. I've never had a question about who assaulted me. So what's the deal with Alan Dershowitz? Was he just a lot better at wiggling away from the claims against him? And was she just afraid of what he could do? Because that is a legal giant. He'll rip you to shreds. And did she just let it go because she was scared? I don't know. I know a lot of people say Alan Dershowitz told the truth, but I have to say that man's gone out of his way to protect some real losers, So we're supposed to believe that he is real trained on moralism and the appropriate behavior since he's always defending the sickos. It's hard to say. Anyway, my final thoughts about the book are, it left me feeling super sad, especially because we know the end. And it left me feeling like I would love to hear a psychologist talk about this, because the book's not real deep. I found myself thinking consistently, the book reads kind of like somebody's like chummy email to you. Like, it's very, very accessible language. It's very surface level. I don't necessarily need to go real deep on the abuse. I'm not interested in hearing all the nitty gritty or asking anyone to relive the nitty gritty. I think I would like some more perspective on the psychology of what it is to be married to somebody with extreme PTSD. I'd like to hear more about Robbie's side of things. I would like to hear about the hopes and dreams he had of what life would look like. I think that his perspective of being married to her would be the interesting book to read. Because my heart went out to him in a lot of ways. I don't think he dealt with things great. I think he had some anger issues. I think he thought that he could be her savior, like I said earlier. And I think he really loved the idea of rescuing this beautiful girl from this terrible experience, because I think any good man would want to do the same. And I really love him for that. I think that I really love that he immediately got her out of that and then wanted to build a life and was very supportive. Like, consistently, I'm shocked by where they go as a family in an effort to protect her and let her continue to uphold the things that she wants to do. But I think that she wanted to do a lot and was scattered in her desires, because I think she really I think what she's trying to do is feel whole. And I think she had a lot of ideas on how to be a help to people when she was honestly needed to focus on just becoming a well person. And I think she kept thinking that the way she would get whole is by devoting her time to a lot of side projects, and that those side projects would complete her. Things like having, abuse advocacy charities, or having a horse ranch, or at one point she wants to start adopting foster kids. And it was something that she really wanted to do, and she knew that her father-in-law had been adopted, so she approaches Robbie, and he initially green lights the project, and they're going down the road and they're getting it all done, and they meet a little girl who they are going to adopt, to foster towards adoption, and they have it all mapped out. And then she gets a call, "Oh, I need you in America. We need you to fly to America, like right now." And Robbie has to come to her, and he's like on his literal knees. He's like, "You have to choose. Like, it's either fight Epstein and all the battles of the past, or lean into this side of being a mom." But he's like, I have to do it all the time. I have to drive everyone everywhere and be mom and dad half the time. And, one, because she's away a lot, but even when she's home, she's like not mentally present. She's very physically unwell also at this point. She's in a haze of medication, and he's like, "I can't bear the burden of the whole family alone. So you either have to do Epstein or we have to do this foster thing, but you've been pushing for the foster thing, and then you're just going to kind of leave me with this fourth kid, and you're going to go fight bad guys in America. Like, I need you to choose." So she, chooses the Epstein thing. And I feel for him in that. Like, I feel for this person who desperately loves and wants to help. They're utterly devoted to each other. But at the same time, the reality of living with somebody with her past who's also trying to deal with it and deal with the demons of the past. And you're just seeing the toll it's taking on your wife, but then also the toll it's taking on the kids, but then the toll it's taking on you as a man, because, you want to go out and provide for your family in a typical way, and you feel constantly hampered at the necessity of being both mom and dad. So I thought that the stuff about their marriage was the most interesting, and that the human element of what abuse does to people, and the payment everyone has to make for the sins of one person, and just like the splatter effect of that into everybody else's lives, as she tried to deal with it. Like, it's devastating. It's super devastating. But and so it was great to hear her perspective in her words. But again, I think an even deeper book would be more engaging. I think one that and one I think from somebody else's perspective who doesn't feel like they have to hide their husband's indiscretions and his frustrations and the abuse that he maybe committed against her, or not maybe, he did commit against her. I want to hear about what brought him to that point. That's a book I would like to hear about, because there's no excuse for why you're hitting your wife. Like, don't you know she's already an abuse victim? Like, what happened that got him that angry when we know he really loved her? You know, like, that's a book I want to read. But this one really was good, and I'm glad that we've had a minute on this channel to pay honor of discussing, because she was such a huge element in the Prince Andrew book. And I think, like, I pray for her husband, I pray for her kids, and I'm just devastated that her life was so hard for so long. There was a point when I thought maybe her suicide wasn't an actual suicide, but I think after having read about where she was mentally at the other times when she'd attempted, and knowing that her husband and her kids had been separated from her, and knowing the medicated haze she was in, I believe now that she did commit suicide, and I'm just really devastated for her, because I think that everything that had happened to her in her life so far was just making her body and mind crumble, because I think she'd just been trying to bear up for a really, really, really long time under all of that. And I just don't know if she ever got the help she needed, even with the therapies that she had like every Monday night on the phone. All right. Well, thank you guys for hanging out with me. I know that was kind of a hard episode, but tomorrow I'll see you for the Friday News Roundup. Bye.